My name is Sarahh Scher. I'm an art historian, and I've been teaching for over 10 years. My specialty is in pre-Columbian South America, but I've taught standard Western civilization surveys, surveys of pre-Columbian art, and expanded non-Western surveys that include Islamic and Asian art. I teach a view of art as a social document. That is, it's dependent upon cultural understanding in order to understand the object. It's usually pretty straightforward, but I want to talk to you about some things that I've run across in dealing with my American students. What are these? Well, I'm sure the Solo Cup Corporation would like me to inform you that they can be used for any occasion. We sometimes ignore the fact that things are iconic to other cultures outside of our own. Many non-American people have told me how the red Solo Cup is absolutely symbolic of American youth culture, particularly gained from watching American TV shows and movies that deal with college life. The way that we teach art history can teach us about things in their contexts, like cups, or like these. When she moved to the United States from the Netherlands to go to graduate school, my friend Meryl was made very nervous by the food disposal. The idea of exposed blades in the sink seemed really dangerous, and she never used it. I had to learn Dutch bike culture when I moved to the Netherlands. I nearly got run over multiple times. For me and for Meryl, there was a little bit of adjustment to things and their contexts, but overall, our two cultures are pretty similar, and it didn't take that much to get adjusted. Research, including studies done at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum and at the Crystal Bridges Museum, has shown that education about art increases flexible thinking and empathy and can help develop critical thinking. Learning about art is good for you. So how do you teach an empathetic view of art from other cultures, sometimes very far removed in time and place? Especially when there's a very strong undercurrent of society that wants to explain everything from long ago and far away by thanks, History Channel. History. Thanks to them, I've had some students push back on my dismissal of alien theories to explain ancient art and architecture. I like to remind them that while medieval European cathedrals were vastly different and tremendously more sophisticated than the housing of any person during that time, nobody suggests that Notre Dame in Paris was built by aliens. I do point out to them that the cultures that are usually selected for these alien assistance theories tend to be non-Western, and that there is a racial assumption underlying these that say that these are people who were not capable of achieving great things. I also like to point out to them that while most of them have probably never done any of the things that you need to do to build a pyramid or a geoglyph, that doesn't mean that those aren't skills you can't obtain. I point to the field of experimental archaeology, in which graduate students are made to haul huge stones of blocks on log rollers, or to shape those stone blocks using simple tools to show that these are achievable technologies in non-industrial societies. It's all about abusing grad students. It's important to realize how human and engaging art is. Art can be the entry point to understanding other cultures on their terms. But we have to overcome some really ingrained ways of thinking about culture, ours and others. Many of my American students tend to think that America doesn't really have a culture, other people do. If they think of American culture as anything at all, they see it as being normal and natural and not an arbitrarily constructed way of dealing with the world. Now, this attitude, of course, is something that's very familiar to anthropologists. One popular way to get students to start identifying and understanding with other cultures is to get them to look at ways that other people know and experience the world that's similar to the way that they know and experience it. Sometimes this is really simple. Most students are going to be perfectly willing to accept that Christianity is practiced differently in different places around the world. You will still occasionally have some trouble with students with very rigid worldviews. I frequently ask them to think about the way that they interact with fictional worlds, like Harry Potter or the Avengers. If they can accept that that's how those worlds work, even if they don't function the way that the world they live in does, then why can't they accept that other people might know and experience the world differently than they do? Doesn't always work, but it works a lot. And it gets them thinking and understanding that accepting others' realities does not mean you abandon your own, and that more than one thing can be true at a time. Some concepts aren't hard to get across. Most students are going to accept the idea of honoring the dead without question, even if the method for honoring the dead is a little bit different from what they're used to. They're also pretty familiar with the idea of putting funerary objects in graves, mainly from the Western fascination with ancient Egypt. The problem when I work with pieces like this is getting students to visually read sometimes very abstract art styles, like this Zapotec deity wearing a very elaborate headdress. More complex concepts can be a little bit more difficult. Approaches to objects that think of them as being animate or animated by spirit forces can sometimes be a difficult concept to get across, especially because I really want to avoid any Disney or Pixar-esque comparisons. This is when that urge to have a similarity contrast or comparison really breaks down and can be bad, because it can lead to a false sense of understanding. The use of human body parts in art can sometimes be difficult, especially because most Americans tend to maintain a physical distance from the dead. Our categories of macabre and icky can very easily overtake any understanding of how these objects may have functioned within their cultures. And I find that it's very important to make sure that I address negative reactions by students and find out how these pieces make them feel before they can then move forward and try to understand how the people who made these pieces would have felt about them. Among the hardest concepts to work with when I'm teaching these kinds of cultures are those religious and political systems that participate in human sacrifice, like the Aztec on the left and the Moche on the right. Now, I'm not saying I want my students to be okay with human sacrifice, but I am saying that when I'm teaching these cultures, I want to get them to a place where they can accept that people can have a worldview in which human sacrifice is normal, natural, and necessary, just as we feel that the way we live is normal, natural, and necessary. That's always difficult because our current values are always going to color the way we look at things from the past. This can lead to some really interesting conversations with students about the change in symbolic meaning over time. Please notice the swastika in the Roman floor. It can be especially challenging when dealing with the clash between two cultures, and students are very rarely unified in their opinions. There will always be some students who unfortunately still believe in social Darwinism and will say that the natives deserved their fate due to being inferior, technologically, intellectually, physically, to the encroaching Europeans. Other students will equally unrealistically hold native peoples up as perfect, harmonious, and in an Edenic balance with nature. You really have to push to get the students to see this interaction between Europe and the Americas as geopolitics and the actors as real people. The second part of dealing with other cultures in my classes involves taking them into the modern world. Indifference is often a huge obstacle. Most of my students participate in English language internet culture, which has a leveling effect and makes them feel as though they have an international scope when they really don't. And this can lead to the attitude that things that don't appear within that world are not worthy of their consideration or relevant to their world. There's also the problem of the recurring dialogue, social dialogue, that sees Native cultures as extinct or nearly extinct. Images of thriving Native modern culture are really important. It allows students to see that Native peoples do not exist frozen in time, but rather are living now and engaging with the modern world in their own ways. Acting as though the fall of Maya urbanism was the end of Maya culture is harmful. The modern Maya are a diverse group and need to be acknowledged as a living, thriving culture. Addressing current political issues is one way to combat the isolation of these cultures in students' minds, like talking about the reasons behind this Zapatista mural here. But we have to acknowledge that when recycled 19th century rhetoric about Indians overshadows complex histories, the cultural items themselves become free-floating stand-ins for actual Native people, a process that in some ways masks colonial guilt about these tough issues. It is absolutely necessary to honor contemporary Native peoples and their own narratives. Repeating or allowing to be repeated old tropes of the vanishing Native degrades empathy and prevents students from applying their contextual knowledge in contemporary situations. And believe me, those contemporary situations come up more often than you might think. But here's the problem. Ooh, boy, am I white. Most teachers are not going to be Native people, and that's one of the reasons why it's so important to incorporate Native voices. You need to try to avoid the cultural colonization that comes from being the lone authoritative voice that explains Native culture to your students. It's perfectly legitimate for a non-Native person to teach about Native culture, but the best way to get your students to think about Native peoples as being in their world is to incorporate their own voices. So how do we do that? Well, audio and visual resources like these at the Library of Congress are a start, but I have to tell you, some of them are really long, kind of boring, and not very good for classroom use. Some United States Native American tribes have official websites, and some of them do offer cultural and multimedia resources. Native contemporary artists often have their own websites. And in fact, James Luna also has several performance videos available on YouTube through the National Museum of the American Indian. But in general, there still are not a lot of resources out there that are allowing students to hear Native artists in their own voices, especially if those artists live in places that are remote and don't have regular access to the internet. And for that reason, I want to encourage scholars who do fieldwork in ethnography, anthropology, and art history to make and share short captioned interviews with Native artists, having them impart their ideas about their work, its meaning, and how they see its place in their society. Doing this will go a long way towards making Native voices present in the minds of students. And scholars are in a unique position while doing field work to make these videos and make them available. Now, of course, this needs informed consent on the part of the artists, but it gives them the opportunity, if they so desire, to speak for themselves to a very large audience. By posting these videos on YouTube, Vimeo, or similar streaming services and making them freely available to teachers and students, we can make these Native voices present and available and create a resource that currently is very difficult to find, often of really bad video quality, and frequently presented through the lens of an outsider's view. I want to encourage tagging the videos with the artist's name, the artist's culture, and the phrase cultural context so that they're easy to find. If scholars work together to create content that can be used in the classroom or given as assigned viewing, it will go such a long way towards making Native voices present in the lives of teachers and students, and to a sense of the fact that Native peoples and their cultures are a part of this world, not just history. Thank you.